Goeiedag. Hi everyone, today I'm in the Netherlands, otherwise known as Holland. I read 8 of the best Dutch novels of all time. So in this video I'll discuss top 8 greatest Dutch novels of all time from 1860s to 2005. These stories are set in many parts of the world, from Indonesia to Iran, from Norway to Cuba. What they all have in common is that they're written in Dutch. At the end I'll tell you my top 3 Dutch novels of all time. First, for a little context, let me tell you about the country and the language. Dutch language in Dutch is called Nederlands, and the English word Dutch perhaps comes from the same root as Deutsch for German. German and Dutch are very closely related languages. The country is known as Holland. It's not the entire country, but the most important province of the Netherlands. It's like referring to the United Kingdom as England. You will make a lot of Scots, Welsh and Irish people very angry. Dutch people are considered straight talker who don't like to beat around the bush. Plus the country is totally flat and there aren't many bushes to beat around. Straight talking and being to the point is very much part of the Dutch culture. So much so that these novels are famous for their first sentences stating a very simple but telling fact. Dutchman abroad is a literary genre in the Netherlands. So traveling is not only a Dutch trait, this also makes the Dutch an outward-looking people and considered one of the most liberal countries in the world. Why? Well, the country is sinking underwater. 60% of the country is under the sea level. Probably the Dutch move abroad to get to a more drier land. Joking aside, 2 of my favorite YouTube travel channels are by 2 Dutch people. E.G. Boots is a Dutch woman on her motorbike, and Hoob Vlogs is a Dutch guy voyaging around the world in an old Soviet van. I think he's now traveling on a yacht. Anyway, what happens to those Dutch people who don't move abroad? Well, they grow very tall so they can keep their head above water as the country is sinking. In the Netherlands, everyone cycles, not everyone gets stoned, and not everyone loves tulips. They don't produce orange, but they love the color. If you visit on the 1st of May, there's a massive party in honor of their queen or king. Officially, it's a monarchy. The Netherlands is one of the freest countries in the world. It's not only the Netherlands, but most liberal countries in Europe are run by a monarch. Historically, we associate freedom with republics and anti-monarchy. But I think being politically sensible is the answer, not whether a country is run by a king, queen, or a child or adult. Being sensible makes a difference. Okay, back to literature. I'll talk about these 8 novels chronologically so you get to learn a bit about the history. See if you can see a trend emerging here. Colonialism to World War II to dementia and immigrant literature. My first pick is a classic, but also a pioneer. Max Havelaar, or The Coffee Auctions of the Dutch Trading Company by Multatuli. Multatuli is a pen name which means I suffered plenty. His real name was Edward Douwes Dekker, who lived between 1820 and 1887 and worked for the Dutch East India Company for 15 years and witnessed many things he didn't like. At the time, the British was selling opium to the Chinese in return for tea. The Dutch were doing something similar in Indonesia. Multatuli was crowned as the greatest Dutch writer by Dutch Society of Letters in 2002. He was a favorite author of many famous people including Freud and Marx. Max Havelaar was written 40 years before The Heart of Darkness, so it's a pioneer in exposing the dark side of colonialism. As we know, the Europeans saw colonialism as a liberating force in the world. Multatuli was among the first writers who thought it otherwise. What is the story? It's a story within a story. The frame story is narrated by Drystubel, a Dutch coffee trader who holds the view that poor people are lazy, and he dislikes the complainer types. He's open, honest, and a bit too self-centered, but also very likable as a character. Bubbly, chatty, and to the point. Here's the very first sentence, which is famous in Dutch literature. I am a coffee broker at number 37 L'Oreal Canal. Later he says, well, reader, this book owes its existence to my inviolable love for truth and my zeal for business. Truth and business, 2 common Dutch traits. He's so proud that he mentions his business like hundreds of times. He approaches life as if it is a business. He receives a parcel full of paper and documents from a mysterious man who lived in Indonesia. He decides to compile the document into a book to make money. In writing the book too, he is like a businessman as he delegates the task to everyone in his family and employees. The main story is narrated by one of his employees, a German man called Stern, and the story is about a civil servant in the Dutch East India Company who witnesses some terrible practices against the natives. The civil servant witnesses that the Dutch authorities force local farmers to produce crops for export, not for what sustained the local population. The result is that the local people's lives are not getting better, which was the main premise of colonialism at the time. It also exposes that the price of these crops depended on the tradesmen or middlemen, so farmers were at the mercy of merchants. This mirrors today's coffee producers in developing countries who are at the mercy of giants like Starbucks and Nescafe. But the most unjust and unfair practice that horrifies the civil servant is the hefty taxation imposed on the local people, and those who didn't pay were severely punished. So he concludes that colonialism was nothing but a daylight robbery. When the novel was published, it had an enormous impact, like the WikiLeaks of the day, exposing some of the darkest secrets of colonialism. People have likened this novel to Uncle Tom's Cabin in America that shifted the public opinion about the horror of slavery. Max Havelaar did the same about colonialism in the Netherlands. The contrast between the frame story of an oblivious, self-centered Dutch trader in Amsterdam is juxtaposed with the horror that was happening on Java in Dutch East India. Most Dutch people had no idea how their fellow countrymen conducted themselves in East India. A somewhat harmless, self-centered man in Amsterdam is juxtaposed with a brutal regime run by the Dutchmen in East India. The coffee shops or tulip gardens of the Netherlands were built on a sinister and very brutal trade system practiced in the Far East. The beauty of Amsterdam and the horror experienced by the farmers of Indonesia. The frame story is very funny without trying to. It's very natural. What is so incredible about the story is that how short it is. You can read it quickly, but its impact remains long with you. I wish Drystable had narrated the whole story. There is a Tristram Shandy feel to it, with its comedy and digression techniques. In most of the novels written by a German man called Stern, perhaps alluding to Lawrence Stern, the author of Tristram Shandy, the wackiest novel of English literature. The title suggests a coffee story, but it's nothing to do with coffee. It is a metaphor here. You enjoy your daily coffee, but how it got to you is the real story. How farmers grow them with blood and tears. How many families are forcefully removed to make way for bigger companies to plant their coffee. How big companies negotiate a price with the farmer. Max Havelaar is a giant of Dutch literature and a must-read. My next pick is a very different beast. We move from dark side of colonialism to a more existential novel of some young Dutch trying to navigate life and growing up in Holland. Amsterdam Stories by Neso. The name Neso, which is Latin for I don't know, was not his real name. His real name was Jan Henrik Frederick Greenlong. His use of pen name was because he didn't want to appear a writer while being a successful businessman. Being stuck in a business world, he needed a venue for self-expression. Thus we have these three novellas. Originally, the three novellas were published separately in Dutch titled The Uitvreter or The Freeloader, Titentje or Young Titans, and Dechtertje or Little Poet. But the translation in English by Damien Searles put them all in one volume, along with a few other short stories. The three novellas are somewhat connected, as some of the characters appear in all of them. It's very difficult to summarize them, as there's not a lot of plot to speak of. They're very short. Put all together, you'll have a short novel. They tell the stories of a few friends. Yappy, the main character in the first novella, freeloader, doesn't want to do anything with his life. He simply likes to sit down and stare at the sea. Thus, he gives the novella the title of The Freeloader. At the end, he has had enough and jumps off a bridge in Amsterdam. The second novella, titled Young Titans, tells the story of a few friends, some who also appear in the first novella. This story is like a picture of before and after for these men. First, we meet them as young boys and later in their jobs and lives as grown-ups. Most of them have not achieved their ideals and dreams of their youth. This novella is also more centered on these men's failed pursuit of women. The third novella is called Little Poet, narrated by the author himself. It's about a young poet who fails to achieve his dream of becoming successful due to the demand of his family put on him. This mirrors Nesko's own life as he had to give up a career in writing for running his family business. I really enjoyed reading these short novellas, barely 100 pages put all together. The writing is really beautiful, sad, evocative, and moving. It's a postcard from a bygone era. Young idealists whose dreams met the reality of life in the Netherlands. The collection has a few more of his stories. I highly recommend this. My next pick is a beautiful novel that was recently translated to English. Daanten, or The Evenings, by Gerard Reeve. Gerard Reeve is considered one of the greatest Dutch writers of all time. In his writing, he used humor and irony to depict mundane. The Evenings, translated by Sam Garrett in 2016, is about Fritz and his parents and some friends. It's a novel of the mundane, the everyday lives of some ordinary people, of family relationships and friendship. It depicts the raw, honest side of mediocrity. While reading it reminded me of short stories by Raymond Carver. There's beauty and simplicity of the characters' lives. Working class people in Amsterdam. The monotony of life, the feeling of being stagnant, feeling ordinary, feeling not on the cusp of doing anything major, just going about life, one day at a time. Fritz's parents are not exciting people, not intellectuals either. They're just people. By the end of the novel, you get the feeling we are all the same. We just live lives like we are walking one step at a time without thinking much about where we're heading. At the end, it is those steps that matter, nothing else. You live, you breathe, but terrible things might strike you at any moment. But right now, you just live, you breathe, and that's all to it. I found the novel very poetic, very profound. Not much is happening, and that's the point. The ending is pretty powerful. You think something amazing might happen, but it's the realization that life is what it is. You live, you read, you make videos, you carry on until you no longer can. My next pick will take us back to Indonesia in the first half of 20th century. Urug, or The Black Lake, by Hase, in English translated by Inak Rilke. Hase, born in 1918 and died in 2012, is called the Grand Dame of Dutch literature. She was born in Dutch East India or Indonesia, so she wrote mostly about her experience there. Her best-known novel is The Tea Lords, published in 1992, that deals with colonialism. But here I'll talk about her debut novel, Urug, or The Black Lake in English. It's perhaps one of the most famous novels in the Netherlands, as it was taught in schools across the country. It's a very short novel, about 140 pages. Set in Indonesia on the island of Java under the Dutch colonial rule, it's about friendship between two boys, one with Dutch parents and the other Indonesian boy named Urug. Their social status couldn't be more different. The narrator, being white, lives inside a bubble, therefore he's oblivion to the plight of the local people. When Urug's father dies in his attempt to save the white narrator from drowning, the family struggles without their breadwinner. At one point, the narrator visits the family's house and fails to understand why his friend's family is so poor. This shows how the white people couldn't understand the struggles of the natives. Urug, on the other hand, despite having a good education and speaking Dutch fluently, is not accepted as fully Dutch due to the color of his skin. The differences in their social statuses means they grow apart as the narrator moves to Amsterdam to pursue further education, while Urug has no such luxury, so remains on Java. Then years later they meet again, but under a very different circumstance. World War II is happening and Indonesian nationalists are fighting for independence. The white narrator wants to return to his home in Java, but he is emphatically told that it's not his home and he must leave by none other than his old pal, Urug. Now, he has no friend, no country, and confused about his own identity as to where he belongs. Now the bubble has burst for him, a huge shock to the system. Years of privilege and blindness to the plight of the native people suddenly hits him in the head. What is remarkable about the novel is how two boys living in the same country yet so far apart. The novel was initially read as an exotic story that took place in an often romanticized former Dutch colony in East India, but later it became to symbolize the dark side of colonialism and the guilt it brought among the Dutch people. The film version, which came out in 1993, tried to highlight that the story wasn't exotic and the Dutch were as the bad guys. I enjoyed the novel, the language is very easy and vivid and the story is very moving. For my next choice, we'll leave the Netherlands and move to Norway. Beyond Sleep by Willem Federick Hermans. William Frederick Hermans, born in 1921 and died in 1995, is one of the greatest Dutch writers. He's famous for writing pessimistic novels about nihilism and failure. His loner characters often fail to understand the world, other people, and even themselves. Beyond Sleep is about Alfred Essendorf, a young, ambitious Dutch geology student who heads to Norway to study the impact of meteors. He believes that in order to fulfill his life, he has to make a scientific discovery, otherwise his life is a failure. With a bit too much enthusiasm but little preparation, he sets himself a task and heads to north. In Norway, his attempt to find an aerial photograph of the meteorite impact failed as he travels from disappointment to disappointment. Finally, he meets one of his older friends, Arne, who is a geologist and knows the area quite well, so they decide to travel together. Soon they meet two more Norwegian geologists. But the extreme hardship and all the elements being against them, Alfred finds it extremely hard to get along with his companions. He questions his bad luck and doubt starts creeping in. He questions whether he's good enough for the task at all. His attempt to do better than his own father seems a daunting task now. He starts to think there must be a conspiracy against him. His paranoia grows as he battles the elements, mosquitoes, and worst of all, insomnia. He leaves the Norwegian geologists and later he gets separated from his friend and guide Arne. He cannot even manage to read his compass correctly, and it leads him in the wrong direction. By the time he tracks back his footsteps, he finds his friend fallen to his death. A geological search for some rocks turned into a quest for meaning and identity. The narrative is in the first person present tense, so there's a lot of self-reflecting going on here. At the end, he achieves nothing he had set up for, simply because he wasn't cut out for the job. He failed to learn from his mistakes and too stubborn to listen to others. His only discovery was his own failure and incompetence. Despite the beautiful settings, northern Norway, and vivid language, it's a gloomy, dark novel set in the darkest region of Earth where night lasts for 6 months. It reminded me of Kafka, where everything is nothing but failure and darkness. Also, there's a slight similarity I found with Look Per by the Danish author Henrik Pontoppidan, where the bright engineer doubts himself and finally resigns himself to a simple life. If there's one message in this book, it is this: sometimes no matter how hard you work, your effort will not be rewarded. The best you can do is not to doubt yourself, or don't go on an expedition or start a project half-heartedly. Alfred's fatal mistake was he didn't recognize his own incompetence, doubt, and pessimism soon enough. It's often good to know when to stop something. Now we move to Netherlands again to read a novel that deals with old age. Out of Mind by J. Burnley. J. Burnley, born in 1937 and died in 2012, was a prolific Dutch writer who wrote as many books that even piled up it was taller than him. There's nothing in the world that is taller than a Dutchman except Burnley's books. The novel is translated to English by A. Dixon in 1989. Out of Mind is a short novel told in a beautiful language, but the story is quite sad. It is set in the city of Alkmaar in the Netherlands and tells the story of Martin, a man in his 70s, and his journey of developing dementia. His much younger wife, Vera, cares for him, as Martin's memories of their lives is slowly getting erased. The novel tackles dementia inside out in the first person. It starts quite normal, but soon the narrative goes into a complete ramble of a man scrambling to hold on to his rational thoughts and memories. The ending is pretty sad, and you read as though watching someone drowning as he helplessly clutches to the straw, but you know there's only one way this ends: back down and never being able to pull himself up again from the oblivion and loss of his memories. On the outset, it seems a very simple story, but it's powerful. It makes you question the whole idea of reality. Reality appears to us and then slips away. Then it reappears for a little longer before vanishing forever, as if inside a tunnel. As I was reading, for a few moments I had to stop and look around me in my attempt to keep up with my own reality. It's an easy book to read, but a hard one to digest. It hits you in the head. It made me reflect on my own life. For years we live in the future as we are growing up. Then we slowly start to look back, and when we get to an old age, we are nothing but our past memories. Without our past, we have nothing to show. We have nothing. Once the past slips away from us, we are lost forever. Chilling but beautiful novel. The next novel is considered the greatest Dutch novel of all time. The Discovery of Heaven by Hermans. Hermans, born in 1927 and died in 2010, is a towering figure in Dutch literature, wrote about 80 books. His father's collaboration with the Nazis made World War II a major theme of his writing. The Discovery of Heaven tackles the same issue, sons trying to understand their father's legacies. It should be called Fathers and Sons. Wait a minute, Turgenev already wrote that 150 years ago. The Discovery of Heaven was voted the best Dutch novel of all time in 2007 and made it into a movie in 2001 starring Stephen Fry, one of my favorite people on this planet. I read the translation by Paul Vincent that came out in 1996. Heaven in the title, of course, has religious connotations. The Dutch people are known for their secularism and mercantilism. Even the Japanese, during their 250 years of total isolation from the West, only allowed the Dutch to settle in one corner of Japan, because the Dutch, unlike the Spanish and the Portuguese, were not spreading the Bible, but they were there to make bucks, not Christians. The Discovery of Heaven, the story centers on three young people right after World War II. Two men, Max and Ono, and one woman called Ada. On the one hand, we have Max, a womanizer astronomer in search of heaven. On the other hand, we have Ono, an upright and rational son of an ex-prime minister, and who is not surprisingly involved in politics. They happen to have the same birthday, both born in 1933 when Hitler came to power in Germany. Max is half Jewish and both of his parents died in World War II. His Jewish mother was betrayed by his father, and he in turn was executed for collaborating with the Nazis. Their chance encounter turns into a very deep friendship, like strong family bond. Then comes Ada, a young musician who first dates Max for a while and later switches and dates Ono. Later, the three head to Cuba and meet Fidel Castro by mistake. While in Cuba, Ada sleeps with both men separately without the two men knowing this. She gets pregnant, but she can't tell which of the boys is the father. Later, the three are involved in a car accident. The men aren't hurt, but Ada gets badly hurt and remains in coma. The child is born through cesarean section and is okay and raised by Ada's mother, who now secretly sleeps with Max. When Ono's political career is over, he disappears. Max is on the verge of discovering heaven when he is ironically killed by an asteroid. When the child, Quentin, grows up, he searches for his father. He goes to Italy and meets Ono, and together they steal some stone tablets and head to Jerusalem, where he flies to heaven. Oh boy, I didn't like the ending of this novel. Carl Jung said that past subconscious memories are carved inside us, and sometimes they manifest in curious ways. It seems the author had some religious memories or dreams, and they play major roles in the novel. The middle part, where the focus is on the three characters and their lives, is quite interesting, but not the beginning and end. The generations who experience wars want to forget them, and the generations that come after the major wars want to understand them. That's the main theme of the novel, but it's more like an encyclopedia of literature and science. It talks about Kafka, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Nietzsche, Einstein, Freud, and many more. In a way, it's like a modern-day epic or origin story with two opposing characters like the rational Apollo and the passionate Dionysius, or the religious Abel and Cain. Why the Dutch people love this novel? First, it's written by Hermans. Second, despite religious themes, it's very liberal. Two men having relations with the same woman. It deals with the war that divided the Dutch society. Also, despite being a secular country, spiritualism or the search for meaning never stops. Or perhaps the writing is beautiful, or the publisher are smart merchants. Okay, my final choice is a novel written by a first-generation immigrant in the Netherlands. Here we have Islam and politics mixed in a small town in Iran in the latter half of the 20th century. The House by the Mosque by Kader Abdullah. The novel is set in Iran before and after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The setting is Zanjan, a small town and a household of Akajan, a local businessman and a community leader. It starts off with a family going through a marriage, but little did they know that the ground beneath them would soon shift and their lives would never be the same again. Before the revolution, there is resentment against the regime. Then comes the revolution to liberate the people, but it also has some unintended consequences for the family and country. Akajan, as the protagonist of the novel, tries his best to keep everything and everyone together. but the social forces are much too big for him. The family is torn apart and the world will never be the same again. It's a charming story, very simple but vividly told, and takes you to a very interesting yet unfamiliar world. It took me only a few hours to finish it. There are a lot of Persian terms used in the novel. The novel suggests a strong autobiographical vibe as events are told in chronological order. Events simply unfold and get more and more dramatic. This does not suggest that it's not exciting. It's very suspenseful at times, as the secret police show up at the doorstep from time to time. Many political intrigues, but also some romantic ones that challenges the traditional way of thinking. I like the humble tone of the novel, not bragging or trying to be more than it is. A simple story of one big family swept by the tide of history. If there's one lesson at the heart of the novel, it's this: every revolution is a revenge. New people in charge take revenge on those toppled. They don't change the conversation, simply turn the table. If there's one criticism, it is this: it is written for a Western audience. Therefore, some of the events are artificially inseminated to make it pregnant with many events quite familiar to Western audience. So some parts don't appear very natural or organic, driven by the lives of the characters, but by a historian trying to do too many things. So it appears the story is told to fit the historical events. I love the beginning, the focus solely on the lives of the characters. Later on it becomes swept up in history and shifts focus to bigger people and events. The characters aren't witnesses, but they shape the history later on as they become very powerful after the revolution, which seemed a bit unbelievable. The real hero is Akajan, a respected businessman and the leader of the local community and custodian of a mosque, who carries the emotional force of the narrative. When he cries, you cry. When he's happy, you are happy. He's a great character, a great man who takes his responsibility very seriously, a bedrock of the community. And of course, holding such office doesn't come easy, so he does have an old way of thinking, but overall a great character. Okay, those are my choices for the best Dutch novels of all time. If I have to choose, my favorite is the three novellas and Amsterdam stories by Neso, followed by Gerard Rev's novel The Evenings, and Uruk by Hase. Dank je. Thank you for watching. I'm on a journey to read books and stories from every country on earth, so if you want to tag along, please subscribe, share and comment, as it helps the channel.